Good evening and welcome to Gibson's Bookstore Remote. I am Elizabeth from Gibson's Bookstore, and I am very pleased to be welcoming two authors here tonight in celebration of Emma Loewe and her new book, Return to Nature, the New Science of How Natural Landscapes Restore Us. She is joined in conversation by Hannah Fries, who is the author of Forest Bathing Retreat, Find Wholeness in the Company of Trees, already on our shelves, but it will be re-released, I believe, in a new edition, a new format, Being with Trees, Awaken Your Senses to the Wonders of Nature, Poetry, Reflections, and Inspiration. These books are available from Gibson's Bookstore, and we are very happy to get them into your hands however you like. You can come into the store, you can call us on the phone, you can order via our website. We are very happy to get these books to you however we can. Emma, congratulations. Your book came out. This is your launch week.
Yeah, thank you. It's so exciting.
Congratulations. I'm very excited about this. I feel like every winter I forget how much I need green things until the snow disappears and I go for a walk and I'm like, that's right, trees. I forgot I needed trees. So I'm very eager for you to talk to us tonight about this book. If you are watching this later on YouTube, feel free to like the video, throw a comment in, subscribe to our channel. You'll get more videos like this. But on that note, Emma, Hannah, please take it away. Tell us about the trees and why we love them.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Really glad to be here. And I should say that I've also, of course, been reading Emma's book in preparation for this, which has been a pleasure. And I think we're going to have a lot to talk about, so it's going to be fun. So if you aren't yet familiar with Emma's book, and you probably aren't because it just came out, it's a one-day-old book baby. It is divided into 8 sections that talk about 8 different landscapes on Earth, and leads the reader into relationship really with each of those different landscapes in different ways through research on how humans interact with those landscapes and the potential healing effects of those places on the mind and the body, and also prompts to engage with those landscapes in different ways, as well as how to support those landscapes in different ways, support their health in return. So I wanted to start off by asking Emma, what is your home landscape? And how has your home landscape shaped you? Because I think that's a great place to sort of get acquainted.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Hannah. And yeah, I mean, I think I'm lucky enough to have probably two main home landscapes. You know, I grew up on the coast of Connecticut, so spent a lot of time by the water. So beaches and oceans have always, you know, been had a real pull for me. But then I think, as a lot of people on this meeting might know, and anyone who's read the first page of the book will know, I also grew up with a really beautiful old maple tree right outside my bedroom window as a kid. And I think having that tree there was always just, you know, I have such fond memories of it. And I think it was always a real source of support for me, and also, you know, wonder. I loved sort of like seeing all the little critters run around in it, and this, you know, the leaves change through the seasons. So I've always felt a real affinity for, you know, forest and tree landscapes as well. And right on cue, the noise. I live in a city now, so also very comfortable in, you know, urban landscapes, and sort of, you know, the built environment is where I've spent most of my adult life.
And the forested landscape is really my home landscape too. I grew up right near where Gibson's Bookstore is. And I too had a maple tree in my backyard that was, it's still there. It was very dear to my heart. I climbed it many, many times, as high as I possibly could go, and wandered around a lot in the woods behind our house. So we have that in common.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I was curious as I read Return to Nature and saw all of this really interesting and wonderful research that you talk about as you've moved through these different landscapes. I was curious how you approached your work doing that research, and what question you focused on as you did that.
Yeah, definitely. So I think, my main sort of question that I went into the project was how different areas in nature can help us, and then also how we can help them in return. I've always been really fascinated by the research showing that getting out into, green space and nature is restorative, but, obviously there are so many different, places that you can go in nature and so many different experiences you can have. So I was curious to explore, the research, how it might apply to the lesser discussed landscapes like rivers and deserts. And, I was interested in organizing the book that way. And then, I always knew it had to be a more reciprocal sort of book, in that I didn't want to just talk all about the ways that, nature helps us. I think it's important to also consider, what we are giving back to nature in return at all times. So each chapter ends with sort of an explanation of some of the biggest threats to that landscape from, environmental sustainability perspective, and then also provide sort of mindset shifts to help people protect the landscape that they've just connected to moving forward. And yeah, it's definitely a very research heavy book. I did a lot of just poring over, scientific databases for that sort of sciencey side of things, and, reaching out to researchers. I should note that I wrote it during the pandemic, so just a lot of Zoom interviews, a lot of emails. So yeah, I talked to a lot of scientists, and then, but I also know that, a lot of what nature experiences are can't necessarily be quantified scientifically. So it's important for me to also bring in some personal narratives to the book. So I also reached out to people like mountaineers for the mountain chapter, deep sea cave divers for the ocean chapter. It was important for me to weave in the Indigenous perspective throughout the book, just sort of get a sense of, people who really have interesting and unique relationships with their home landscape, to sort of learn how, see it from their eyes, and, see what they really enjoy most about it and how they interacted with it. So yeah, a lot of sort of culminating of information, and hopefully I presented it in a way that is interesting and makes sense.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you say about wanting to bring together all that research under one, between one cover, because I think you're right. You see, one just about trees or green spaces, just about city parks, or just about gardens, maybe, I don't know, but seeing some of the those more unusual landscapes that we might think of as harsher too, like ice and snow, and what else is there? Oh, deserts. I mean, because you often see that you think of people as being sort of fitting into a category as desert people, or as, forest people, or and maybe I've already given myself away as a forest person, but no, I do enjoy a lot of different landscapes too, and it's nice to see it all sort of considered together, as in the many different ways that we can connect to all the different places on the planet. I think a question that some people might have is, okay, I know that when I'm outside in nature, I feel better, just like Elizabeth was saying. Oh, I remembered, I went for a walk and I remembered how much I love, how good it feels when I'm going for a walk and I see the trees and I see the green things start coming out again. And so why do we need, this research to tell us that nature is good for you? What does the research add to the conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is a question that I thought about a lot as I was working on the book. And I think, one sort of answer to it would be, we might know that getting outside is good for us. And yet, I think a lot of us still don't, do it enough. The best estimate that I could find was that the average American spends 6% of their day, outdoors, which certainly feels true to my life, especially, weekdays. So yeah, I wanted this book to sort of be just a reminder of, all that sort of waiting outside of our doors, and, maybe be an invitation to, get off the screen and head out, or, really carve time for nature just for the sake of your own health, especially during, a period of such intense stress and burnout and just total like tech overload. So that's definitely one side of it. And then I think that, another reason that this research in particular, I think, is so important is that, obviously there's so much of nature that, like I said before, really can't be quantified. But I think that by finding, or at least trying to assign some data to like the health benefits of getting outdoors, that's really information that is helpful for people like city planners, or policymakers, or people who are really like in positions of power and are deciding, what areas of nature should be protected or where nature should be introduced in city settings. So I think the more, research we have to show just how important, access to nature is for our health, the better. And yeah, I have a lot of respect for the people who are doing that research, and honored to help share their work in my own little way.
And it seems like that would also feed into the equity issues in city planning too, if it's raised as a not just a nice thing to have, but an essential thing for human health.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that, that's a real sort of tragedy that I did a lot of research on as I was working on the book, was just this idea that nature, within cities in particular, really isn't equitably distributed. And it does tend to be, clustered in areas that are wealthier and predominantly white. And I think that there is a big movement right now just to, increase that equity as we are, increasingly becoming a more urban species. So that's another sort of interesting conversation to have.
Yeah. One of the emotions that we often, it's often evoked when we're out of doors is awe, which you talk about a lot in your mountain chapter. And certainly that's the landscape where I have felt a great deal of awe myself, in the White Mountains of New Hampshire in particular. You get that sort of soaring sense of awe and a sort of sense of freedom. And I enjoyed your discussion of that in that section. And it made me think about how much people long for that, and have been even more so perhaps over the last couple of years, searching for that sense of awe and reverence. I was wondering if you could just say a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, in addition to helping us reduce, sort of more negative feelings and emotions like stress and anxiety, getting outside can also really introduce us to some really positive emotions, and awe is definitely one of them that's being, discussed a lot right now. And, awe is really interesting. I think we can all sort of remember a time when we, got to the top of a scenic overlook, or we're standing at, the base of a waterfall and really felt like our jaw drop and our, goosebumps and things like that. And that's sort of the stereotypical awe experience. But awe, it's an emotion that we feel when we're faced with something vast. And, it tends to happen outdoors, but it can also, happen when you're listening to music, or, looking at really beautiful art. It's sort of that feeling of almost feeling small in such a huge world. And that's one thing that I really love about the illustrations in this book. My illustrator did a fantastic job, Harriet Lee Marion. But a lot of the figures you'll notice in the sort of larger images are very small, and they're in this landscape that just like takes up the whole page. And I think that sort of encapsulates, what it feels like to feel in awe of your surroundings. And something that's really interesting that researchers are finding about this particular emotion is in having in sort of rooting us in a landscape in a new way, it can also make us sort of reconsider our place in the world, and it can make us reconsider sort of our sense of time. They're finding that it helps with increasing our perception of time, so feeling like we have more time, to give. And also it can help enhance things like creativity, even like pro-social behavior, just by sort of, helping us almost step outside of ourselves and reconsider our place in the world. And I think that that's something we're all really craving right now, especially, after I, for example, just have spent so much more time than I ever thought possible in my apartment. And, it's a very sort of monotonous daily routine, and awe experiences just have a really great way of, shaking things up and reminding us sort of what else is out there. So that, I think that's one sort of reason that we're all chasing it right now.
Yeah.
But I know that your work too, Hannah, it's very nature centered, and I'd be curious to hear sort of about how the outdoors plays a role in your, creative process, and if getting out there makes you sort of see or, consider your work any differently.
Yes, definitely. I was just thinking as you were talking that, well, we tend to most commonly or most easily feel awe in those vast landscapes, that I think maybe the next most common might be when perceiving the complexity of something that might even be very small, which kind of it plays into my answer to your question, I think, about creativity, because, and also related to a sort of more cloistered pandemic life. I think that one can train oneself to be more open to awe, and not necessarily require some vastness. If it's just a neighborhood walk and you're extra attentive to the things around you, looking very closely at a flower or an insect or something that you passed by 100 times, a tree that grows around the corner. There's an enormous, amazing sycamore tree that grows right outside of McDonald's, on this sort of strip in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, near where I live. And every time I drive past it, I have that like jaw-dropping experience. It's just a tree on this like strip of not much. And I always wonder how many people even see that tree anymore. But I think that we can train ourselves to be more open to those things. And I try to practice it, because I can certainly go for a walk and not see the things around me because my head's just spinning with thoughts. But it's part of my sort of creative practice of being alive to the world in a way that, I feel like while I am giving my attention to the world, I am also receiving from it at the same time. And out of that comes a lot of my writing work. Yeah, so it's definitely connected there. And actually, this leads well into my next question, because you actually talk a lot in the book about heading out into nature with a intention of finding something, which I think is part of that sort of training oneself to look, to be attentive, to see, to be awed. How do you think that this kind of intention can change your experience when you're out there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you put it so beautifully just by saying that, by giving nature our attention, it gives us so much in return. And this is sort of a theme that I came across a lot as I was, working on the different chapters of this book. It's just this idea, I think it was very well encapsulated in this one study that came out of the University of Michigan. And they essentially found that when people were heading out into their nature walks, if they headed out with what they refer to as an awareness plan. So an example would be, a poet looking out for your next muse, or, a botanist looking out for a new plant species, just sort of giving people that almost like assignment. They tended to return from their walk, rating it a lot more positively, and also saying that they felt more restored afterwards. So I just think it all comes back to the idea of, when you go out in nature with the intention of being more mindful to your surroundings, you can always be amazed by what you see, even if it's a landscape that you've walked through, hundreds of times. It's funny, I actually did this practice earlier today because I was feeling stressed about just everything in the world and had to head out, and I was pretending to be a painter looking out for a new color to use in my art. And I just found that, the process of doing so, it really takes you outside of your own head and away from your own thoughts for a little bit, and just allows you to sort of rest your attention elsewhere. So I think it can be incredibly valuable, and it's just a great way to sort of see, your surroundings from a new perspective, which I think can always be very, very impactful.
Yeah, and I'm keeping my eye on the chat because people are posting all the wonderful things that bring them that sense of awe and wonder in nature, which is really fun to see. So I have noticed that, and I notice this sometimes when being interviewed about my book, that sometimes the wellness industry, when they get a hold of something like that looks like sort of like a quick fix, like nature will heal you, go for a walk. They want to know, exactly how long, exactly what benefits do I get for what is this exchange exactly? So, it makes me wonder what the risks are in that, when you frame nature as something that you can get something from, or that benefits your health. Nature is like a pill that you can take, and how are you trying to sort of shift that kind of thinking?
Yeah, definitely. So I've had similar experiences, and it's another thing that I really thought about a lot as I was working on this book. And I think I'm always so wary of painting nature as if it's some like commodity. Nature is not for us. I think at the end of the day, it is us, and we are it. So my hope with those sort of last mindset shifts was just to show people that ultimately what we do to nature, we do to ourselves. So in order to sort of keep ourselves and our environment healthy, we really need to consider it as an exchange, like you said, and a reciprocal sort of relationship. So yes, I hope that I was successful there. And yeah, I'm always wary of sharing. I know one question that a lot of people have is like, how long do they have to get outside every week in order to like reap the benefits of nature? And I just think like there have been studies to show that it's like 2 hours, but I think it's such a personal decision. So my answer would always just be, however long you need to feel restored and feel more like yourself.
Yeah, just go out and find out. Go out there and see. Yeah. Don't think too hard about it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yes, and Emma mentioned what she called mindset shifts, which is a section that appears at the end of each chapter of the book, that does that, that work of, how can I shift my way of thinking to bring not only my own health or my own well-being into the picture, but also nature's health and nature's well-being. So I think that's a really nice addition to the conversation. So when I read the chapter on ice and snow and winter, I kind of chuckled because you called yourself a winter wimp. And we're just coming out of winter now. And I think we're all, just taking in all the little signs of spring that are coming bit by bit. And I certainly am too. I do tire of winter, but I also actually love winter. So I was just wondering, as like I was saying before, many people find themselves drawn, particularly to this landscape or that landscape or this climate or that climate. Was it a challenge to kind of get out of your own comfort zone when writing about some of these different places?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think like a lot of, folks, I definitely enjoy getting outside more when the weather is warm. Yeah, the winters in New York can be brutal at times. So, writing that chapter, it was fun because it really did, sort of shift my perception of the whole winter season. And, I think part of that was, reading the research and seeing that there is actually no reason to believe that getting outside in like a snowy, on a snowy day is any less restorative than heading outside on like a 75 degrees and sunny day, as long as you're prepared and dressed appropriately, obviously. But that was one chapter where we really loved getting the perspective of people who, really spend a lot of their time in snow and icy landscapes. I talked to a few skiers. I talked to a really incredible figure skater who skates outdoors. A woman who has like traversed Antarctica with her husband, like all these really cool people. And I sort of went into the interviews thinking like, oh, they've clearly always loved, snow, and that's just in their blood and it's who they are. But ultimately they told me like, no, we're obviously this landscape holds the same sort of challenges for us as it does for you. I think where they have a sort of a different way of thinking about it is, they feel really rewarded when they are able to go out and sort of push through that discomfort and really, find sort of, awe and wonder and real, personal sort of discovery when they are out in the snow. So I think that was a really important reminder. And also, in writing that chapter, actually, I spoke a fair amount to people who study silence and noise, and hearing their perspective was interesting because they would just talk about how, after a snow, it really brings on a very unique sense of silence. And I know that at least living in New York City, the city's never quieter, more still than it is after a snowstorm. So I think seeing some of those really unique and really special elements that snow can bring, it did, change my perspective on it. It helped me become slightly less of a nature or a winter wimp. I think I'm still kind of a winter wimp, but I'm working through it. But yeah, I'm curious to hear sort of how you think about, snow. I know you mentioned that you love winter and you live in Massachusetts, so tell me.
And I loved that little bit about the figure skater who takes her skates to all sorts of sort of remote places to skate. I was like, I want to do that. That's so neat. I think there's something about winter, the way, and I should say I love winter when it's relatively cold, as in below freezing, and snowy. And I get really angry at winter when it's just kind of icky and rainy and brown and gray and not nice. So I have work to do too. But I do love the way a snowfall can just transform the world, from the soundscape, like you say, to I love cross-country skiing down roads that haven't been plowed yet. It's like you've gotten out there, before society has had a chance to come along and and tidy it up again. And just skiing in the woods and the sort of starkness of it, and just the way like some of the people who you spoke to, the way you kind of feel your body working to stay warm, and because you're moving, you're staying warm. And there's just something about that that's very, very meditative too, I think.
Definitely. And it's cool too, because, you mentioned sort of like creating your own trail, and the figure skater, I think, is a beautiful example of this too. But, snow really gives us the opportunity to sort of leave our mark in a sense, and, have a different sort of relation with nature, which I think is also super cool and unique.
Yeah, I know. I want to keep our snowy winters.
But I'm also ready for spring, with that being said.
Yeah. So the last chapter of your book focuses on urban landscapes and the things that urban landscapes have to offer this conversation. And that's something that perhaps isn't talked about enough when it comes to nature and what we I guess our relationship to it, our relationships to the urban landscape is also really important. So why did you choose to include the built environment? Obviously you spent a lot of time in it, so that may be an answer, but can you just tell us a little bit more about that chapter?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I always knew that I wanted to include urban landscapes, both because just such a large chunk of the population, lives in them or lives near them or considers them, a sort of home base. And I know as someone living in a city that it can feel really, cut off from nature, and it can feel like you don't necessarily get access to that, like, capital N nature unless you're able to, leave the city to, go elsewhere. So, in the process of writing the book, I was curious, I made sure to ask pretty much everyone I spoke to about, how they think about city nature, and, like, pretty much across the board, they said that, nearby nature, things like street trees or pocket parks, they can be just as restorative as those sort of vast, faraway places if we do give them our full attention. So I think, again, it goes back to this idea that it's all about the ways that we sort of engage with the world around us that ultimately dictate our experience. So, and that was a great reminder for me personally, just because, it sort of reinforced this idea that I don't have to travel to all these, faraway places to sort of get a sense of the power of nature. And I love the way one researcher in particular put it, Kathy Wolf at the University of Washington. She compared nature to, like, food. So she essentially said, I love Thanksgiving meals and large, gluttonous gatherings with friends. So that being the sort of far away, landscapes, but they're not enough to survive. And I need that sort of daily nourishment. So with that being, the more sort of close to home nature encounters that you might find in a city. So that was a really beautiful way to think about it, I thought, and it really resonated with me. And, I think it's important to remember, like, I don't want anyone to close this book and think that they need to, like, book a trip to Yellowstone right away. I would hate for that to happen, just because I think, we can save those carbon emissions and find some of the same wonder in our own sort of backyards. Another thing I was wary of was just sending everyone to, like, pristine, wilderness areas and almost, like, loving those places to death, so to speak, is sort of a concern among conservationists. So yeah, I really wanted to encourage everyone to find, a part of their city that they felt like they could really immerse themselves in. And again, there is, like, incredible inequity with the way that nature is dispersed in cities. So I think educating yourself on that is also very important, and, taking a stand against it if you're able. So there's a lot to consider with the city chapter, but it was ultimately, I think, one of my favorites, just because, it hits very close to home for me.
Yeah, I appreciate that, even though I am probably a city wimp. I'm easily overwhelmed in a large city, but I think it's really important not to be snooty about this, about nature, and going to nature you're feeling like, it's only real if you go to some special place, rather than this is just something that is all around us, and that anybody, anywhere, can experience in one way or another. Still keeping in mind that, that eye toward equity, so that more people can access more of those green spaces, or desert spaces, or white snowy spaces. But I think that was a really important chapter to include. So, and a lot of these ideas that we've been talking about, you bring together really beautifully in your closing epilogue in the book. So I just wanted to invite you to read a section of that, just to give people a sense of your actual writing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, as you mentioned, this is from the epilogue, so no spoilers really, but it sort of talks about this, idea of writing the book during COVID, and thinking about my own, city and how it changed during that time. So here we go. Forced to stand still for all these months, we've learned to simply watch the world move around us, and move it has. The cycling of leaves through all 4 seasons, the daily dance of clouds, the minute-by-minute shifts in sun and shadow. These are the modest dramas we've taken in from our windows, seen on our walks. When we've had to lean on nearby nature to stand in for the far away, we found it to be up for the challenge every time. Even when we are able to immerse ourselves in foreign and wild and wonderful wilderness yet again, I hope we remember these window journeys, these armchair travels. I hope we all continue to seek smaller moments of wonder and surprise in the outdoors, the kinds that make those larger ones feel all the more grand. I hope we remember what a world cut off from nature could look like. I hope we do everything in our power to keep it from becoming reality. I hope this book can help. Nature, like us, is full of joy and pain. In it, we see ourselves clearly. We recognize our capacity to be as forceful and domineering as snow, as unpredictable as waves, as resolute as rivers. We are reminded of our own nuance, our own human nature. I started this project looking for a way to return to a childhood in the trees despite being an adult living in concrete. Along the way, I found that there are more shades between green and gray than I could have ever possibly imagined, and they all sit outside my front door as they do within me. I look out onto the city and see vibrant blues and purples, deep reds and yellows, burnt oranges. I open my window and breathe them all in, drinking the fresh air as if for the first time.
I love that idea of the mirroring that you see, the things that you see in nature, you see also in yourself, because after all, we are not so separate.
Absolutely, one and the same.
I think we're ready to open it up for questions, Elizabeth.
All right, so I have one to start us off. You already mentioned you have a whole city chapter, and I wanted to ask you, like, does the sky count? I mean, when you go outside and you're in a concrete jungle and you can't get to the real jungle, you can still go outside and you're not surrounded by walls. So the sky counts then if you can't get to a park.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I spoke with one guy who was so interesting, and he was the head of what's called the Cloud Spotters Society, I think it is, and it's in England, and it's a real thing. And it's all just people going out and looking up and talking about what they find with each other. And yeah, he described clouds as nature's most equitable display or something like that, just to get at this idea that no matter where you live, you can usually see the sky, and even if it's a cloudy day, there's even more to see. So I love that idea.
That's really beautiful. And that's a really wonderful sentiment. I asked in the chat sidebar, audience members, what are some things in nature that you find beautiful or inspire delight and awe? And several people right away said like sunsets. And this is one of those other things that everybody can see the sunset in some way or another, the sunrise or the sunset. So those are also fairly equitable. So that's That's really nice. I'm going to write that down. Joy has a question. They say, which chapter was the most difficult to write and which one taught you the most?
Thank you for that question, Mom. Joy is my mom. The most difficult chapter to write. I would say desert, I think, just because that's a landscape I really haven't spent that much time in. So again, I really, relied pretty heavily on the interviews that I did with folks who inhabit that landscape, and hearing their stories was super interesting. Again, that's another hard landscape that I think, if you're not from the desert, it can be a bit, intimidating or off-putting, but yeah, researching, sort of the way that, the open sort of views of the desert can really be, restorative for the mind. And, the resilience of desert plants is another thing I read about in that chapter. So I think there are a lot of really special parts of that environment. And what was the second one? My favorite chapter?
Which chapter taught you the most?
I would say cities. Yeah, I think for all the reasons we talked about, I came into this project sort of wondering if there really was, nature to be seen in a city environment. And yeah, I walked away with a newfound sort of view on the place that I live.
All right, that ties neatly into my question here. Was there a health fact that surprised you to learn?
Yeah, there were a lot. I think that one that is fitting for this conversation, I'm curious to hear your perspective too, Hannah, was just all the incredible sort of unique elements of forest environments and how getting out into, taking a walk in the woods can really be, great, not only for relieving, stress and, giving the mind something new to focus on, but also there's research to show it can even be, supportive for the immune system and have like really, really impressive like heart health benefits. So that was one for me.
Yeah, there's some fascinating studies out there, like the I think you wrote about the phytoncides, the scent. Often we can smell when you're in a pine forest, or the balsam, or there's other tree scents that actually they're part of the tree's immune system, and it looks like they may help stimulate human immune systems too, which is pretty cool if that's really what's going on.
We have a comment from Carol. This is just a comment. Can't wait to read the book. I think as human beings, we sometimes need a jump start to reconnect with ourselves, and nature is the perfect medicine. Walks on the beach, especially watching the waves coming and going, helped me with my serious health issues. So even, this is kind of like a soft benefit, just the mental boost of, just the reconnection, the sense of grounding. Do you have any, do you have a connection with the beach?
Yeah, it's funny because right now I live in Brooklyn along the East River. It's right outside my window. So I actually, that's sort of been my, nature ritual of choice lately, is just to look out onto the waves of the river. And I do think that there's something so incredibly calming about it. It's almost like the wave pattern like calms down my brain waves. That's how I think about it sometimes. But yeah, I think that, a lot of people feel very drawn to ocean environments for one reason or another. And I think that they can bring, something really special to the table.
And I think there's something to be said for the way our minds and our bodies, our mental health and physical health are so intricately connected. I think sometimes it's hard to tell in these studies. Is it just that you feel less stress, you're just more relaxed, or is it any of these other factors, or is it all of them, that's playing into it? In some ways, maybe it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I'm glad that Carol had that experience too.
there's something just very meditative and soothing about the repeated, like the whoosh whoosh and the white noise. And I mean, when my children were babies, certainly the waves, white noise on the little sound machine was one of their favorites. It's very meditative, and it kind of forces you to stop, and it quiets like the brain gremlins. Like there's no more room for other emotions when you have like the whoosh of the waves. It just fills you, and it pushes out all like the negativity, like all the roughness, and it's just like you are now filled with nature, and it's nice. So
Yeah.
early in the event, you were asked about the need to quantify some of this research, and my first thought as I was listening was immediately that one extremely logical person in our lives that we all have, who is like, I don't make emotional decisions, I only make decisions based on research and logic. And I'm sure we all have at least one of those people in our lives. And my first thought is, that's the person who's going to say, well, I don't care what feels good, I want to see the research. And this research is now really beneficial to hand to the person who takes pride in taking, logical choices. And it's like, it is researched. It has been studied. Look here, it's written right here. It's good for your health. Go take a walk and go outside. And some people need it to be quantified in order to believe it, because they only go by research. So that was my thought there. And I do wonder how many people were behind that research, like the need to quantify things. You can't quantify everything, but some people need to. And that ties into a question we have here from Nancy, who says, how did you go about finding those you would interview?
Yeah, so, going into this project, I knew that there was research out there, but I really did not anticipate just the wide breadth of research that's out there. And I think one interesting thing that I'll note is that those who are really studying this in deep detail, they come from really all professions. You have doctors studying forest environments. You have even like mathematicians looking at how the different patterns in nature and sort of the structure of different parts of nature can influence our brain. You obviously have psychologists doing a lot of research in this space, epidemiologists, public health researchers. So there are so many people to talk to, which is a real, I think, blessing if you're, a writer and a journalist. So in terms of finding them, I mean, just the internet, I don't know. I've really just poured over sort of, like I said before, research databases, and then, just reached out to people who I thought looked interesting and asked them, who they thought were doing interesting work in the space, and just sort of, letting them sort of help guide, where I turn next. But yeah, the world is full of interesting people to talk to about this topic.
I'm sure that they're very eager to talk to you about it too. Like finally, someone who's interested and can help. So that's wonderful. So I think we're at about at the end of our hour. So I wanted to thank you for joining us tonight. And thank you as well to Hannah. Emma, Hannah, thank you so much for joining us. Return to Nature is available from Gibson's Bookstore, as is Forest Bathing Retreat. But Return to Nature is the big exciting one this week. We are so pleased. If you ordered the book from us, we're getting them out to you. And everybody, I hope everybody gets out and spends just a few minutes outside this week. Some of you are getting storms, some of you are getting sun. It's all good. But I wish you sunshine this week. Emma, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.